There are two identities, the being identity and the doing identity. The being identity is your truest self, you just simply living your life. And the doing identity is the version society motivates you to become. Women operating under the doing identity lose their selves of being. We grew into the doing identity as everyone convinced us that simply being is wasting our time, and we feel like being is insufficient. Therefore, we strive to become someone who we are not. In my previous video, I talked about there's so many ideologies cruising around in the internet telling us who to become, who is worthy of admiration, etc. From being that girl ideology to becoming the Proverbs 31 woman, getting into this challenge, getting into that challenge. One is just better than the other, and people just try to hop on that trend wagon and try to be part of that identity, and they just try to be part of that group just to belong somewhere, basically. And these are all ideas of people portraying it to be a certain measuring stick, and suddenly groups of people identify and try to fit into this identity, which is wild. But at the end of the day, all we want to do is to belong somewhere. We're all social beings, so we just want to be part of a group, and that's why we just try to fit in so bad. And that's just sad. Like, we just feel like it's not sufficient to not force ourselves into a certain group, into a certain ideology, because we just think being ourselves is simply not enough. So the question is, when did it begin that being is simply not enough anymore? I think it began when sin entered the world and when God distanced himself from humans, from the first people, where humans started to form ideologies thinking this is a better way to become something greater. That's how human ideologies basically took over. We just decided ourselves how God created us to be is simply just not enough anymore. So we need to strive to become something greater than who we are. And that's when we feel like, okay, we are actually living life as it should, as we should, right? If we strive to become greater than who we are, then we're actually doing it right. But here's the thing, I love self improvement, I love everything growth related. But this still very much is a different narrative that is being told. Because simply trying to improve yourself to be a better version of yourself versus being something greater, or like, I mean, how do you even define greater? I bet someone sitting there again thinking, okay, that is the measurement of great. So in order for someone to feel like they have achieved great things, they would have to hit that measuring stick and hit that level, and then they have done great things, or they are great, or they are worthy, or they're successful, or they're sufficient, or, right? But that is a totally different narrative than trying to improve yourself, because at the end of the day, what we forgot is that we are not competing against other people, but we're actually competing against our older versions and ourselves, basically. So the only competition that you should be focused on is trying to compete against the version last week of yourself where you felt like, oh, last week I was at this level, now the next week is ahead. I want to advance myself, I want to improve myself, and therefore hit another level. But you're not competing against Susie right there, who actually already built her empire, but rather you're comparing yourself to what you did last week and what you're doing this week. And that's how you actually form a healthier version of trying to become greater without trying to strip your identity to follow someone else's identity, perhaps even without realizing, and follow their path of success. And the thing as well is some people really are successful already because they just do the thing that they are great at doing. And now people try to copy their success without realizing that their success was meant for that person and their life circumstances and their life's experiences. And now people on the outside, not living his or her life, try to copy and embody it, but you just can't because you have a different background. Like your brain wiring is completely different. Your environment is totally different. Maybe that person lives somewhere in Asia and you live somewhere in the States. You cannot compare those two life paths. And also, the reality is, many feel safer in the doing identity than in the being identity. And the reason why is because they simply don't know who they are. Let that sink in. So, if you don't know who you are, you don't know how to simply be yourself, right? You simply don't know how to be you. This is very upsetting when we think about it. Also, very dangerous to not know who you are. Because we live in a society that targets everyone's identity. If you don't know who you are, you don't know what you tolerate, and you don't know what you don't tolerate because you just follow the masses blindly, which is what I've talked about in my last YouTube videos, which I'm going to be linking up here. So also give it a watch because following the masses is very, very destructive. Following the broad path is very destructive, which the Bible also talks about because it says that whoever follows the broad path, that path leads to destruction. But if you follow the narrow path, the small little gate, where it's really hard to get through, and it's a path that is very less traveled, you actually are distinct from the majority, and you actually walk the right path because it is more difficult, but it leads to your truest self, right? Following the masses blindly will lead you to even forget who you actually are. So the thing is, following the masses costs you your identity. And this is very dangerous. It's very crucial to be aware of that as well. Being trapped in the doing identity costs you your identity too. You don't know how to be yourself, so rather you flee into doing and distract yourself from being. But what if the things that you're doing and the masses that you're following do not align with who God created you to be? We fear being outsiders. We fear being the weirdo looking from the outside in and not really being part of the bigger picture. And because of that fear, we silence our own voices and live lives that deep down make us feel sad, unfulfilled, anxious, worried, angry, and so much more. And now I just want to ask you, is it worth it to be living a life where you deep down just don't have a peaceful spirit, a peace of mind, because you feel like you're missing out on something you cannot put your finger on? Or maybe you can put your finger on, which in my opinion feels even worse. If you know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it, it's better to live a lie and not knowing what you're doing than knowing it and not doing it, because that's just another pain, y'all. From the outside, you got told, oh, it actually doesn't bring you enough money. It doesn't bring you a great reputation. It doesn't bring you the status. It doesn't bring you the fame. It doesn't bring you the partner that others admire you for. It doesn't bring you the stability, but all of this is at the price of you losing your identity and silencing yourself and not realizing that this is not your path. I'm not here to rip you out of life and say quit your job tomorrow and just go on that trip, on that world trip that you've wanted to take since you were 18. I'm not telling you to do things that are irresponsible in your current life situation. But what I'm telling you is to start reflecting where you wanted to be and where you are today. And not to fear resentment, but just to gain awareness, because awareness is the first step and the key to so many things. So if you gain awareness, that would already bring you miles forward because you are aware. And the next step after awareness is decision. You have to decide what you are going to be doing with the awareness. Now that you're aware of something, how do you decide? But that is the second step. So, first, really just focus on the awareness that you just realize, okay, so perhaps I haven't done this back then because my grandma told me this, or perhaps I wanted to take that career path, but others told me, oh, it's actually not stable, or perhaps they didn't even think that I could pursue it, so they talked me out of it. Just knowing all of these things will give you so much clarity. And with this clarity, you can do so much more than just, as I said, quitting everything that you're doing and just become a free spirit and be like, let me just go on a trip and forget that life here where I am right now actually exists. So, of course, structure, rules, regulations, systems are important and needed for our society to survive and to function. But it is also not to say that following your path, like your God intended path, will lead you to being broke and homeless, because that's also what majority of people think. For me, for example, when I look back on the moments where God told me to follow his ways and not my ways, it made me look crazy. And yes, I do have crazy faith, which did not come from anywhere. It's not that I decided one day, okay, now I'm gonna own my crazy faithness. No, it just developed, it just grew. I learned how God operates. I understood God's character. I understood who He is, that God doesn't lie, that when He promises something, it is said. Like, God is not a man that shall lie, so He cannot lie. When God tells me something and He promises me, if you follow that path, this will await you. It is said. There is nothing to debate about. So it's like a whole process that you just go through, that I went through, where I realized, okay, God, you told me this, and I believe you. I know that you don't lie. I trust you. I heard the testimonies of what you've done in other people's lives. So who am I to think that you cannot do it for me? Let me dare to do X, Y, and Z. So I did certain things that look crazy on the outside. But at the end of the day, I noticed how going God's way, walking God's path, seems very unstable at first. For example, he tells you not to take on that job offer that you've been waiting for because he has something better for you weeks or months later. And now the question is your faith that big enough for you to wait the few weeks or months, but you don't know the time, right? Because God, He doesn't really tell you when you're going to receive certain things. He just says, have faith and trust. Trust in Him. When God says having faith, it is not having faith in yourself, because you can only do so many things and we are limited. It is to have faith and trust and reliance in God. He does not expect you to believe 100% in yourself. No, because that would be very difficult. And He knows that. And God doesn't want to make our lives more complicated than they already are. And He invites you to truly trust and believe in Him. And by doing that, He will make everything good for you. That's a promise already. That's a promise. And I'm having goosebumps right now because that's how loving God is. Like, he knows what he has planned out for you, because in Jeremiah 29:11 it says, for I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope and a future. Actually, let me quote it exactly because I've written it down here. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. So everything that God does for us is for our best. It does not always feel like it, but we also have to be aware of the fact that our feelings do mislead us. We can feel a certain thing here, and 2 hours later, we feel completely different. Is that to say that the same situation, 2 hours later, you feel calmer than before, that this situation all in itself is bad? Or rather, your body, your hormones, your emotions, your chemicals just kind of like exploded and tried to regulate themselves. And meanwhile, you tried to decide whilst you were overly anxious or worried or angry or whatnot. That's why it's also so important to calm yourself down before making decisions. That already is a whole sermon in itself. Some of us are really great at deciding something in the heat of a moment. That's not the best moment to decide, okay, I'm going to end this relationship, or I'm going to quit my job, or I'm going to book that trip. Calm yourself, be still, and then decide. To bring this to conclusion, the plans that God has for you are good. He wants the best for all of us. And He has created each one of us for a plan and for a purpose. But that plan and purpose comes with lots of attacks of people trying to tear you away. If you're following God's path, you're actually on the narrow road. Keep that in mind. And as soon as the outside, your environment speaks into your life, it slowly but surely happens to take you on a different path. So you end up here with the mass, right? I encourage you to reconsider what sets you apart, because you are different than everyone else. Even though you try to fit in so bad, you are still yourself and different. God has set you apart for a reason. So don't try to go back and mingle with others. Try to be like everyone else, whilst you have your own soul identity, which God highly invites you to search and to knock at His door and to ask God, who am I and who have you created me to be? So the question I want to end this with is, who are you before you do something?